The lights are pretty bright in here, so it's hard to see these in what I think is their full glory. So when everything's done, I can come up and look at them on the computer, or we can turn the lights off. When I asked Rachel, she asked me if I would be willing to do this. I said, sure, I'd like to talk. And I said, what do you want me to talk about? She said, well, talk about your work, talk about yourself. I said, okay, well. So I thought, what would I like to hear if I were attending at a talk by a photographer? Well, I'd like to know sort of how the photographs came about. So that's the theme, if you will. There are three elements that went into the photographs that you can see at the exhibit and these photographs here. The first is place. So I want you to picture yourself as me, or my wife if you're a woman. We're in a car with a real estate agent driving around town looking at houses. We used to live on the corner of Main and Gregory here, just north of the university. We never had a second car because I could walk into work. It was really, really great. But when our kids all left, we thought, well, maybe it'd be nice to move someplace that had more trees, a little more nature and so on. Both my wife and I like that. So we were with this real estate agent driving down Windsor Road, which at that time was still two-lane, unimproved. We turned down High Cross and started south down High Cross. My wife turned to me and whispered, you don't suppose it's that house, do you? Well, it was that house. That house was a house that's all by itself in woods on High Cross Road. The reason we knew about it was because when my daughter was in high school, one of her best friends lived in a housing development that was sort of right across the road. So we used to go down there all the time before she could drive, and we would drive her there, pick her up. One time my wife even got me to drive in the driveway because there was a for sale sign up. And we can't do that, it's not our house. We didn't buy it then, but it was that house. We liked the house, we liked the property. It was 5 acres. And it was great. As we were finishing the tour, we walked out the front door, and there was a great blue heron flapping along in the sky. And my wife turned to me and said, it's a sign. So we made an offer and then immediately left for a basketball game because it was NCAA basketball season. We had tickets for the Illini playing in the tournament. Anyway, in 2001, we bought the place, and it was great, except that when we looked out the front door, what we saw was a little bit of garden and then a soybean or a cornfield, depending upon the year, because half of the property that we bought was actually being farmed by a tenant farmer who was farming the rest of the area. And we thought, well, that's really not so nice. So we thought, in our naivete, how hard would it be to put in a prairie? Not so hard, right? So we decided to put in a prairie. So 2003, with help from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, which had a program called Acres for Wildlife at that time, as long as you had 2.5 acres or more, we had 2.7 that we were going to convert. As long as you had 2.5 acres or more, then you provide the seed and they would do everything else. They would plow it, they would seed it, they would come back, cut the weeds the first year. It was a wonderful program. First year, mostly we got weeds, but after that, it really got well established. And so almost all of the pictures, not that one, the mountains, that's in Alaska, almost all the pictures that are in the exhibit were taken in this, what we call the backyard prairie. And as an aside, that's quite appropriate. Jamie Ellis, a colleague of mine, and I have written a book. We're trying to find a publisher for it that describes this backyard prairie. So that's the place. The second element is photography. My father was a photographer. He had a camera. When he passed away, we had thousands upon thousands of slides of his that we had to go through and decide what to do with, because he took pictures everywhere. So I had a good role model, and I got a little click camera when I was young. When I went to graduate school at the University of Oregon, I paid $200, which in 1967 was a lot of money for my first really good camera. And I kept that camera with me all the time. I took pictures of all kinds of things. Over the years, got pictures of my kids. Over the years, you know how it is, especially somebody who's got more than one kid, you have thousands of pictures of your first kid, hundreds of pictures of your second kid, and the third kid gets a picture if they're in with the other two, right? That's the way it goes. So my photography kind of declined a little bit. But when we bought this place, I thought, there are great photographic opportunities here. So I thought, let's go digital. But I didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on a big camera if I really wasn't going to use it a lot. So I bought a little Canon point and shoot, a couple of $100. We could afford that. It was a good investment. And I found that I really took a lot of pictures. So some years later, I did invest in a good camera, and that's the camera that I've used ever since. The last element is my subjects, insects, right? Rachel said I'm in a department of entomology. Now that has its pluses and minuses. I love being in that department. I love my colleagues. It's a wonderful department. It's ranked nationally first or second. It has been every year since I came, and actually before I came in 1972. So it's a really highly ranked department. We've got we got about 10 faculty, and 2 are members of the National Academy of Sciences, which is the highest honor that an American scientist can have. So that's a really high percentage, obviously. So I like being in the department. However, I have no training in entomology. I have one graduate course in entomology, which qualified me to answer yes to the question, can you teach an introductory course in entomology? When I was interviewing, one of my competitors for the position had to say no because she didn't, and she told me this later, she didn't have any courses in entomology. She had no background. I thought, well, I could muddle through this and be okay. So I got the job. But the disadvantages of being introduced to people as an entomologist is somebody will say, oh, my cousin found this bug. It was black. It was about this big. It's got 6 legs. What is it? Well, it could only be one of 100,000 insects. But apart from that, I didn't know any more about insect systematics or classification or anything than people who had spent a lot of, just casual observers, because that wasn't my field. I was an insect physiologist. The other disadvantage was that my subject, don't shy away when I say this, my subject was cockroaches. But I worked on the physiology of cockroaches, how they move, how they coordinate their movements, how their brain works, and all that kind of stuff, which was interesting to me. However, my wife likes water, beaches, oceans, waves, sunshine, those kinds of things, right? There is no marine insect in the world. That is the only environment that insects have not been able to exploit. So I couldn't go to a marine station for the summer, which she would have loved to have done. So those were the 2 disadvantages. The advantages were I got to be around great people, and I had a good career, but also it gave me, I think, kind of a leg up in looking at subjects for my photography. I've always been interested in insects, and some insects are really pretty small, and you have to know where to look for them, you have to know when to look for them, you have to know how to approach them. One of the things, for example, there is a picture of a dragonfly there. Dragonflies are mostly very skittish. They're predators. They have these huge eyes. You all know what a dragonfly looks like, I'm sure. And if you come close to them, off they go if they're even landing. Some of them tend to fly around and don't land, which makes them really hard to identify. But if they land and you scare them off, one of the things that you learn very quickly is if you stand still, they will often circle around and come back to that same perch. So you scare them off, you move a little closer, and you get your camera ready, they come back, then you can take their photograph. So you kind of learn their behavior, and then you can take photographs of them. So over the years, especially since I've retired, I've taken more and more photographs of the things that we see in this. We call it a backyard prairie. It's really a front yard prairie, but backyard sounds better as a book title. So there are lots of things that we see out there, and I try to photograph as many of them as possible. I even do have one photograph of a coyote, which is not easy. We see tracks all the time, but we don't see them too often. So I don't restrict myself to insects. And as you saw, some of the pictures are just sort of scenery, but scenery is interesting too. So I wanted to keep this short because long lectures are usually dull lectures, and I didn't want to give a lecture anyway. So, questions? I have a camera, yeah, I do have a camera. I have a Canon 40D, and the lens that came with that particular body when I bought it is a 27-135 millimeter zoom. And that's the camera, that's the lens that I use most often. But I also have a telephoto that I'll use for shots of things that I can't get real close to. 400 millimeter. I bought a 300 first, and the 300 worked fine, but then I wanted to buy a tele-extender. For those of you who don't know, a tele-extender is something you can buy that you put between the lens and the camera, and it sort of magnifies everything, so you don't have to spend another $5,000 on a different lens. You just spend a couple of $100 on this thing. But the lens I had wouldn't fit. It has to take a particular kind of lens. So I sold that one, bought this other one, which was 400, and that works fine. You had a question? Well, that was one of those cases where the dragonfly didn't fly off. It was sitting on the top of a stalk of some flower. I'd have to look at it, see if I can tell what it is. And I took probably a couple of dozen pictures of it, first with my regular lens, and then so I would take a picture just so I had one, right? And then you walk a few steps closer, take another one, so the image gets bigger and bigger, and then I put on my telephoto. I'll get to you. and step closer and closer, and it just stayed there. I didn't, as long as you move slowly, sometimes you can approach insects much closer than you think you can. Okay, yes, sir. I was thinking about that the other day because somebody asked me essentially the same question. What's your favorite book? I don't think I really have a favorite one. So, I mean, I could say monarchs. Everybody loves monarchs, right? But I think the most interesting one, yeah, there's the dragonfly. I think the most interesting one is the praying mantis, because a praying mantis looks so human in its behavior. I mean, obviously it doesn't look anything like a human being, right? But if you look at a dragonfly, you walk up to a dragonfly, and dragonfly will sort of sit there and ignore you or fly off. Okay, it's an insect, it does that. Butterflies do the same thing, beetles, whatever it is, they look at you and fly off, or they jump off their grasshopper. A praying mantis, first of all, they're predators, and so there aren't too many things that eat them. Therefore, they're not too shy. Secondly, they're ambush predators, which means that they sit in one place and wait for an insect or something else to come around. They don't go hunting for it. And that means that behaviorally, they tend to stay in one place all the time. So if you see one, they're fairly easy to approach. They won't fly off. But because they're predators, they have these big eyes out on the side of the head, so they actually have binocular vision. So they can tell how far away something is. And that's important because their prey has to be a certain distance from them so they can reach out and grab it with their forelegs. And there's no point in snapping at something if it's out of reach. So they do this triangulation, if you will, or binocular vision thing with their eyes. And their heads are extremely mobile. A lot of insect heads are sort of, well, they all have necks, but some are so closely attached to the body that they really can't move. I mean, you don't see a grasshopper moving its head very much, or a ladybug or something like that. But a praying mantis, you come up behind it, it notices you, and it'll turn and look at you. And that's creepy. I mean, you get an insect that's this big, the Chinese mantis are this big, and it's looking at you. You think, whoa, am I in a horror movie here? There are certainly changes, but I would say the changes are episodic rather than all in one direction. I mean, for example, there's been a lot of publicity in recent years about the decline of the monarch. Fair enough. The number of monarchs that are overwintering in Mexico, I mean, you can look, and the area covered is much less now than it was 20 years ago. So there are fewer monarchs. Last year, we see monarchs every year on our prairie because we have good habitat for them, lots of things for them to eat at this time of year, for the adults to eat, and so they're around. But last year, I didn't see very many at all. I saw maybe, one or two every week or so. This year, I can't go out on the prairie during the day without seeing a monarch, unless I close my eyes. They're just everywhere, and I don't just see one, I see 2, 3, 4, and that's unusual for our prairie. And it's the same thing with other insects. This year, we haven't had many dragonflies. Now that may be because it's been so dry. Dragonfly nymphs, the young, before they mature as adults, require water. They're aquatic. They have to live in the water, and they eat things that they catch in the water. So if there's not so much water, there may be fewer dragonflies. I don't know. That's just a surmise. But in previous years, we'd seen a lot of dragonflies. This year, not so many. But I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years, we'll find the dragonfly population will come back up. So where we are, I mean, we don't apply pesticides to the prairie, and the prairie is 2.5 acres, not very big for a prairie, obviously, but it's big enough that insects can feed and overwinter and reproduce and make more of themselves. So unimpeded by these pesticides. In the situation you're describing, where you've got roadsides, then you have all kinds of things being applied there. And it's not so much that the pesticides kill the insects, it's the pesticides kill what the insects feed on, or maybe the habitat is destroyed or something like that. Well, sometimes, I mean, I pass myself off as a professional photographer in the sense that I do sell pictures. I have a business card, so that makes me a professional, right? It has a website address on the back. If you don't have one at your seat, you can come up and get one here. So in that sense, I'm a professional photographer. As far as the IRS is concerned, I'm a professional photographer. On the other hand, real photographers think that somebody who doesn't actually make their living from photography is a hobbyist. And by that criterion, I would be classified as a hobbyist. But what that means as a practical matter is I rarely go someplace just to take photographs. I mean, I will in Illinois. There are places that I go just to take photographs. But when I travel, I usually travel with my wife, or I'm going to meetings or something. I always bring a camera. So I go places and I photograph where I am. I don't go places to photograph. I go for other reasons, but the photography is sort of part and parcel. I was telling Rachel that I take, my wife and I have frequently gone down to Sanibel Island in Florida, which is a great place for nature photography because there's a national wildlife refuge there. And you can take beautiful pictures of birds and insects and other kinds of things. On the beaches, I've taken lots of photographs down there. But I didn't go there to take the photographs. Once I'm there, I'll say, okay, what do I see here that I think is really interesting, beautiful, attractive, that I would like to show to other people? I mean, if I had to characterize my photography in a nutshell, it's not nature photography or travel photography, it's photography that tries to convey to somebody else what I saw in a place. Well, the first piece of advice, especially in the age of digital, is take lots of pictures. The second piece of advice is don't keep them all. That's the hard part. I mean, I know people who've taken thousands of pictures and they still have thousands of pictures, right? I'll take 1,000 pictures and I may keep 100 because they're not, some are 5 pictures of the same thing. I don't know if you are all Monty Python aficionados. You know that skit where they're showing photographs. This is Uncle Phil on the west side of the house, and this is Uncle Phil looking at the east side of the house, and you know, and the guy's like getting the pictures and tearing them up. That's what a lot of people have. They take snapshots and then keep them all. But you've got to learn to be ruthless. My wife sometimes tells me, you're too ruthless. You're getting rid of these pictures that I'd like you to save. Well, she would never look at them again anyway, so I don't take that advice too seriously, unless it's our kids. It's a different matter. Take lots of photographs and learn to judge what's a good photograph or not. There are an enormous number of websites that help you learn to take better photographs. You have to learn about composition, you have to learn about color, you have to learn about the rule of thirds, about how to position things in a photograph so that it attracts people's attention. If you take a photograph of a person and the horizon that the person is standing against is right in the middle, top to bottom, and the person is right in the center, that's a bad photograph because you've got nothing, you've got no mystery in it, if you will. I hate to say things like that because it sounds pretentious. You know, what's the mystery in a photograph? But you will find, you can try this yourself sometime. Take a picture of somebody like that and then try to take another picture. Put the person off to one side and put the horizon down. So the horizon's about 1/3 of the way up. That's where the rule of thirds comes in. The person's about 1/3 of the way in, right or left side, it doesn't matter. Take that picture and then look at the two and have somebody else look at the two and say, which picture looks more interesting? And I will bet you 99 people out of 100 will say the picture with the person not in the middle is more interesting because it has a different balance. You're balancing open space against an object, which is a feature of good art. I mean, if you look at painters, they do the same kind of thing. So these rules are, you know, were established long before photography. But the important thing is that if you want to be a better photographer, look around for sites online that tell you. I mean, you can sign up for online newsletters. They're free, and they have just tons of advice. And almost all of it is really good advice, too, I've found. So practice, 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 practice. And if you ask somebody for advice, take the advice, don't defend what you did. That's the worst thing. People do this all the time. I mean, I write too, and as a scientific author, you get used to writing. You write an article. I don't know if you know much about how this works. You write an article and you send it off to a publication to be published. Well, they don't just say yes or no. They send it out to somebody else and say, what do you think of this? And they let you know. They let you know what they think of it. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is really great. I sent a paper into a fairly prestigious journal one time, and I was keeping my fingers crossed because I hadn't been invited. It was a feature article. It was a big deal to get published in this magazine. I really wanted this. So I got the reviews back. I saw the logo, the return address. Oh, here are the reviews. My hands are shaking. I open it up. I read the first review. It says, this paper has problems in 3 areas. I thought, oh, well, it was a good word. It was worth it. In fact, that it was a bad reviewer because what the reviewer did was to set up 3 essentially straw men. It says, well, it's bad in this respect, but actually it's not that bad. And it's bad in this respect, but, well, that could be fixed. And this other respect too, but that's okay. And so it was, I never found out who that reviewer was, but they took it. But that's the thing, that you have to learn to take criticism and not just say, well, but, you know, you may have had good reasons for it, but don't ask for criticism if you're not willing to listen to it. You don't have to act on it, but you should listen to it. So those are, I don't know how many rules I gave you for being a good photographer. I have, well, the website given on the business card is where you can go to see most of my pictures. I've probably got close to 10,000 images up there from all over the world. And they're organized by place, and they're organized separately by subject with duplicate. I mean, you won't find something in one place that's, every photograph is taken in a place, so that's the primary categorization. But if it fits some other category, then I put a copy there as well. So that's one place to go. I do have a Facebook page, Delcomyn Photography. If you click like on that, then you get notified every time I put up a new post. I have a feature I call Photo of the Week, so every week, more or less, I try to put up a new photo, say something about it. The exhibit you have until Thursday evening or early Friday morning. 10 o'clock, I'm meeting with Rachel, and we're going to take it down. I do have some of my photographs for sale at international galleries in Lincoln Square. And as Rachel said, they're doing a First Friday, is that what it's called? So on October 6th, I will be there, and some of my photos will be featured at international galleries. In addition, there is an artist's gallery in Tuscola called The Vault. And I have some of my photographs down there. And that's it for right now. Next year, I've got an exhibit at Nature Preserve outside of Decatur, but that's not for a while yet.
Thank you, Fred.
To get involved and support the Urbana Public Arts Program, please contact the Public Arts Coordinator Rachel Storm at rlstorm@urbanaillinois.us or 217-328-8265.